It was 1976, in a small Nashville recording studio. Elvis was warming up for a private session. Then, from the corner, came a sound hesitant but pure. A boy, barely 12, fingers searching across the keys. He couldn't see Elvis, but Elvis could see him, and everything stopped. Stories like this remind us why music matters. If you believe moments of kindness can change a life, stay with me, because what Elvis did next would be remembered for decades. June 1976. RCA Studio B in Nashville. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke and the faint temps of hot electrical wires from the recording gear. Elvis Presley was leaning against a stool, laughing with his backup singers. Then, from the far side of the room, 3 quiet piano notes slipped into the air. Hesitant, searching, different, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A faint hiss came from the big Ampex tape machine. Engineers adjusted faders, not paying much attention at first. But the sound grew. Simple chords, uneven but warm, filling the corners of the studio. Heads began to turn toward the small upright. Piano pushed against the wall. A boy sat there, barely 12, maybe younger, his shoulders hunched inside a worn denim jacket. Dark sunglasses, too large for his face, hid his eyes. His fingers moved across the keys in careful, deliberate steps, as though feeling for the right path in the dark. One of the assistants leaned down to Elvis and spoke quietly. "That's Timmy, born blind, loves your music. His mom works in..." The front office brought him by to hear a rehearsal. Elvis didn't answer right away. He just watched. The boy's mother stood nearby, twisting her hands in the hem of her sweater. She didn't look at Elvis. Her eyes were locked on her son, as if willing him not to make a mistake. The room's chatter faded. Only the piano and the occasional squeak of the bench as Timmy shifted his weight broke the silence. Elvis leaned back slightly, the corner of his mouth curling into the faintest smile. It wasn't the skill that caught him, it was the feeling in the notes. The keys clacked faintly under Timmy's hands. A faint whiff of coffee drifted in from the break table. The studio's walls, lined with gold records, seemed to pull closer, like the room itself was listening. Elvis finally spoke, not loud, but enough to cut through the air. "You all hearing this?" One of the backup singers nodded without taking her eyes off Timmy. The boy kept playing, unaware that the most famous man in the room had stopped everything to listen. If this were on film, the shot would tighten on Elvis's boots stepping off the stool, then up to his hand resting briefly on the microphone stand, as if considering his next move. Some in the room expected Elvis to nod politely and move on. After all, this was his recording time. But instead, he straightened, rolled his shoulders, and started walking toward the piano. The closer he got, the more heads followed him, until the entire room's attention funneled toward that one small corner. Elvis stopped beside the piano, his shadow falling across Timmy's hands. Without a word, he pushed back the bench just enough to take a seat. The moment Elvis sat down, the studio went still. Even the faint hiss of the tape reels seemed to hold its breath. Elvis rested one hand lightly on the edge of the upright piano, the other on his knee. His white jumpsuit caught the glow of the overhead lights, but his voice came low and gentle. "Mind if I sit with you, son?" Timmy froze mid-note. His fingers hovered above the keys like birds about to take flight. There was a heartbeat of silence, then recognition. The voice he'd heard on every record, every late-night radio show at home. A shy smile tugged at his lips. He turned his face toward the sound, not quite looking at Elvis, but aiming in his direction. "You're..." Elvis, Elvis chuckled. That's what they keep telling me. The king touched a single key, matching Timmy's last note. Then another. Slowly, Timmy joined in, feeling his way back into the melody he'd been playing before. Elvis followed, not leading, just weaving around the boy's rhythm. The backup singers, still in their spots by the microphones, began exchanging glances. The tall one in the red blouse bit her lip. Another tilted her head, eyes glistening. The notes bounced off the padded studio walls, warm and unhurried. Somewhere in the corner, an ashtray crackled as a cigarette burned out. Elvis leaned closer, his voice just above a whisper. Ever heard this one? He hummed the first line of Can't Help Falling in Love. Timmy's fingers stilled for a second, then picked up the chords. It wasn't perfect, one missed key here, a stumble there, but the sound had a heartbeat. Timmy sang a single line. Wise men say. His voice was thin, but it carried. The room shifted. Engineers turned from their boards. The bass player put down his cup of coffee without looking away. Elvis met Timmy's pace, letting his own voice soften, matching the boy's tone. This wasn't the booming Elvis of Vegas. This was quiet, stripped down, human. If this were film, we'd see a close-up of Timmy's small hands next to Elvis's larger ones on the same keys, moving together. The camera would pull back slowly, revealing the entire room, dozens of eyes fixed on them, nobody blinking. The last chord rang out, a gentle minor note that lingered in the still air. Timmy's smile widened, and he looked like he might speak, but Elvis beat him to it. He turned toward the control booth and said, "Roll tape, we're keeping this." A red light above the glass window flicked on. The band started shifting, picking up instruments, sensing that something rare was about to happen. Elvis looked back at Timmy. "Let's make this one count." The red recording light blinked on, and the room shifted from curiosity to reverence. Every cough, every shuffle stopped. Timmy's hands rested on the keys, trembling slightly. Elvis leaned closer, voice low. "Play it like you mean it, son." A nod from the control booth. The soft thud of the reel-to-reel engaging. The piano began, tentative at first, then settling into a steady rhythm. Elvis's voice came in softer than anyone in that room had ever heard it. Not the stadium roar, but a warm hum that wrapped around Timmy's chords like a blanket. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the metallic temps of the microphone stands. Outside the studio glass, the street noise faded. Even the world beyond seemed to listen. The bass player slipped in under Timmy's melody, a gentle brush on the snare from the drummer. It wasn't planned, but it fit. The room's energy swelled. Elvis glanced sideways at Timmy every few bars, nodding encouragement. The boy's fingers grew more confident, pressing each note like it mattered. A bead of sweat rolled down Timmy's temple. He didn't notice, but Elvis did, matching his tempo, keeping him steady. From the far corner, one of the backup singers mouthed the words, eyes glistening. A sound tech muttered under his breath, "This is magic." Halfway through, Elvis raised a hand to the band. The bass faded. The drums stopped. Now it was just him and Timmy, voice and piano. The absence of the band made the notes ring sharper. The emotion hit deeper. In a film, this is where the camera would close in on their hands, 2 generations and 2 worlds apart, yet moving as one. Then it would drift to the control booth, where even the engineers had forgotten to watch the levels. Timmy struck a high, note clear, pure, hanging in the air like a held breath. The room exhaled in unison. Elvis let the space breathe before leaning into the next line, his voice almost breaking. The tape machine's reels spun steadily, capturing every imperfect, irreplaceable beat. Elvis looked out through the studio glass at the small crowd that had gathered, assistants, friends, even a delivery guy who'd stopped in with lunch. All of them were still, caught in the pull of this unplanned duet. Timmy's last chord was softer, like he didn't want the song to end. Elvis let it fade completely before speaking. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward, but sacred. Elvis stayed seated, eyes locked on Timmy. The boy finally turned toward him, sunglasses reflecting the overhead lights. Elvis didn't smile this time. He just stared, as if seeing something no one else could, and said nothing at all. Elvis finally moved, slowly, deliberately. He reached for the scarf around his neck, the one he'd worn all afternoon, and draped it over Timmy's shoulders. "You're my piano man now," he said, his voice soft but carrying across the room. Timmy's mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The engineers in the booth looked at each other. One of them mouthed, "Did that just happen?" The scarf was warm from Elvis's skin, smelling faintly of cologne and the faint salt of sweat. Timmy ran his fingers over the fabric like it was the most delicate thing in the world. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft crackle from a half-burned cigarette in the ashtray filled the space. Elvis leaned toward the piano. "Play me something else. Anything you like." Timmy hesitated, then whispered, "Can I play a hymn?" Elvis nodded. "Go on." The first notes were slow, almost hesitant. Then the melody found its shape. It was "How Great Thou Art," one of Elvis's own favorites. His eyes softened, and without needing a cue, the backup singers rose from their spots and stepped closer. Their harmonies wrapped around Timmy's piano like a warm tide. The studio, usually buzzing with chatter and movement, felt like a chapel. The smell of stale coffee faded into the background. The only thing that existed was music and breath. Some say the moment didn't just sound different. It felt different. Elvis didn't sing. Not at first. He let Timmy carry the song, giving him the space to fill the room with his own sound. Then, halfway through, he joined in, not with power, but with reverence. The hymn became a quiet prayer shared between two voices, one seasoned and deep, the other young and searching. If this were on film, the camera would drift from Elvis's profile to Timmy's small hands pressing each key, then to the eyes of the people watching, wet with tears, lit by the soft glow from the control booth. When the last chord came, Timmy let it linger. The harmonies faded, and the studio returned to silence. Nobody moved for several long seconds. Elvis's voice broke it. "You've got something special, son. Don't ever forget that." He turned to his manager, standing in the shadows by the door, and motioned him over. They exchanged a few quiet words too low for anyone else to catch. The manager nodded once, glanced at Timmy, then slipped out of the room. Elvis leaned back toward the piano and gave Timmy one last smile. "You'll see," a week later, in a quiet Nashville neighborhood. A delivery truck rumbled up to the curb in front of a modest single-story home. Timmy sat on the porch swing, tapping his cane lightly against the wooden slats. He heard the engine before his mother did. The brakes hissed, and two men in work shirts stepped down from the cab. "Mrs. Carter," one called. "That's me," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. From the truck's back, they slid out a gleaming baby grand piano, polished black, its curves catching the afternoon sun. The faint scent of fresh varnish drifted on the warm breeze. Timmy tilted his head. "What's that smell?" His mother's voice caught. That's for you, honey." The men wheeled it carefully. Up the walk, the dolly bumping gently over the porch boards. Timmy stood, hands reaching forward. When his palms touched the cool, smooth wood, he froze. "It's beautiful," he whispered. On the bench sat a sealed envelope, heavy cream paper with gold-stamped edges. His mother opened it, her hands trembling. She read aloud, "Timmy, you'll always have a seat in the front row. Elvis." The words hung in the air. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the sight of the piano gleaming in the doorway. A boy from next door leaned on his bike, wide-eyed. Someone called for their spouse to come see this. Inside, the movers set the instrument against the living room wall. Sunlight pooled across the keys. The smell of the fresh polish mixed with the faint scent of fried chicken from the kitchen. Timmy slid onto the bench, his fingers hovering just above the ivory keys. He pressed one middle C letting, the sound resonate through the small room. Then another, and another. His mother stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. If this were on film, we'd see close-ups, his fingertips pressing the keys, the gold in the note's handwriting, the sunlight flaring just enough to blur the shot. Timmy began to play not to him, not Elvis's song, but the melody he'd played alone in the studio before anyone noticed him. This time, his hands were steady. The sound filled the room, spilling out the open windows to the neighbors gathered. Outside, a woman across the street closed her eyes and smiled. The boy on the bike grinned and tapped his handlebars in time. The song ended, but the applause from the small crowd didn't. Someone called out, "Play it again." Timmy laughed. A sound full of light. Years later, in a smoky bar miles from Nashville, a man in his 40s would sit at a piano, tell this story to a crowd of strangers, and begin to play. The bar was dim, lit mostly by the amber glow of a neon beer sign and the low flicker from a jukebox in the corner. A man in his 40s sat at the upright piano, running his fingers lightly across the keys. "Ever hear about the time Elvis walked into my life?" he asked the small crowd. They leaned in. The air smelled faintly of whiskey and wood polish. Ice clinked in glasses. It was Timmy, older now, lines at the corners of his eyes, but the same steady hands. He told them about that day in '76, the quiet piano in the corner, the sudden hush when Elvis walked over, how they played together, just once, with the tape rolling. The regulars stopped their conversations. Even the bartender leaned an elbow on the counter, listening. Timmy began to play "Can't Help Falling in Love." The room went silent except for the music. His voice was deeper now, worn by years, but it carried the same warmth. In the years after that day, Timmy didn't chase fame. He finished school. He learned more instruments. He started teaching kids, some with sight, some without, how to make music from nothing but touch and sound. He never forgot Elvis's words, "You've got something special. Don't ever forget that." 2 decades later, a radio station aired a segment about lost studio gems. Among them a raw, unreleased recording from RCA Studio B, featuring Elvis Presley and a young, unidentified pianist. Timmy's phone started ringing within the hour. "It's you, isn't it?" one friend asked. Timmy never confirmed it publicly. He didn't need to. Years later, someone uploaded that studio recording to the internet. Within days, it had millions of plays. Comments flooded in. "This is what humanity sounds like. not a dry eye here. My grandfather played me this before my wedding. People who weren't even alive in 1976 shared it like it was a piece of their own past. In his small teaching studio, Timmy kept the baby Grand Elvis had sent him. The black finish had dulled in places, the keys worn smooth. When he played it, the faint creak of the bench and the warm resonance of the wood seemed to carry 1976 into the present. At benefit concerts, Timmy would tell the story, but only after playing the song. He said it wasn't about the gift, or even about meeting Elvis. It was about being seen, he told a reporter once. For the first time, I knew I was worth stopping for. If this were on film, we'd see a montage, Timmy teaching a child. To find Middle C, the original studio tape spinning on a vintage player. YouTube comments scrolling across the screen. The night in the bar ended with the whole room singing along. Strangers linked arms, swaying. When the song finished, the applause wasn't loud. It was long, like no one wanted the moment to end. Timmy stood, one hand resting on the worn wood of the piano. "This one's for the man who gave me my first real audience," he said. "And for anyone who thinks they're playing alone, you never know who might be listening." The camera would fade out on the crackle of the original RCA tape, that last piano note holding in the air until it's just silence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes a small act of kindness can echo for a lifetime. What's the one moment of encouragement you've never forgotten?